Sundar Pichai, welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Shannon, great to be. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I know a bit of your story from childhood, that you were very impacted by even the most basic technology that came along. And I gotta wonder, did you ever imagine you'd be leading a company that is doing things like, listen, this morning on my way to work was the first time I had a Waymo driverless ride-sharing car pass me on the interstate, but other things and new boundaries and frontiers and pioneering that you're doing. Did you ever imagine that as a kid?
Definitely not. I did want to work on technology, but I didn't quite expect what I would be doing today now.
Well, you are in the front of a lot of what's happening in technology, including in AI. We know there are enormous benefits, things like, finding medical cures and automating processes to make life better. But we know there's a dark side to a lot of this, too. So knowing what you know, a much better understanding even than I have, or many Americans or folks around the world, what is it that keeps you up at night when you think about the use of artificial intelligence?
Well, any technology, has a dual side to it. Obviously, with a powerful technology like AI, there are so many benefits we can think of. One day this is going to help us maybe discover new drugs, develop better treatments for cancer, and so on. But as you rightly say, it could be used by bad actors. It could create like deep fakes in a way we won't be able to tell the difference. So those are the kind of things you sit and think about. And the journey of humanity is always, how do you harness technology to benefit society? And I think this technology is no different.
So I want to talk about something Axios said to that point and some of what you mentioned there. They said AI is rewriting the playbook for crime, from cheap deepfake scams and AI-written ransomware to mass identity hijacks and critical infrastructure hacks. They go on to say AI can create automations to lock-pick into a system millions of times per second, something humans can't do. How do we put controls on that kind of use of this technology?
Well, the answer turns out to be is you want to use AI on the defense side, too. So the same way bad actors can use AI, we can also use AI to better detect those operations. In fact, just today, the court ruled in our favor against a phishing operator. They had impacted lighthouse operations. They had impacted over 1 million people in over 100 countries with effectively, scam calls. But, we use AI to detect these bad actors, too. So I think you want to use it both ways. One other example is we now have the ability, it's called Synth ID.
Is this real or AI generated? Sometimes it can be difficult to tell.
You can use it to detect video generated using AI. So us being able to detect and understand whether something was created naturally or was created using AI is an example of how we can cope with these trends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like that would be enormously helpful as we see things that are used in political ads and news stories, and being able to detect when that actually is not something that factually happened. That's good news. Now, a little bit more bad news here. In recent days, we've been covering this case of hackers that are alleged to be either working with China or sanctioned by China, using Anthropic's AI technology to create these hacks, carry out these hacks that had very little human intervention at all. It was really powered by AI. Google, of course, has a substantial investment in Anthropic. So any news on that front and worries about these hackers being able to use them for nefarious means?
I mean, look, these are all examples of we have to up our game in terms of the security and the safety frameworks we build around our products. But over time, for some of this global we need countries to start working together to develop international frameworks of cooperation so that we don't weaponize these technologies against each other. So part of it is us as companies making our products better. Part of it is governments working together to create standards and frameworks by which we all use the technology in a cooperative way. So we're going to need both of that.
Yeah, and that gets me to this question of regulation. There are those who worry that if the U.S. government, Capitol Hill, folks here in Washington, do too much regulation, that China will run ahead of us with a lot of this technology. But there are others who will point to social media, for example, and say there were no good guardrails before it got completely beyond what lawmakers feel like would be more appropriate controls. So do you think there should be regulation? What body or who should be carrying out the regulatory process?
It's a great question. Look, it's an important technology, and I do think we need a balance. I mean, we both need to support the innovation. As you said, this is technology which will affect our national security, our economic leadership. So we need to make progress. So you need a pro-innovative framework, but we need to have guardrails. I think it's really important, first, not to be duplicative. Many sectors are already regulated. So, for example, if you're going to use AI in healthcare, the existing regulation in healthcare serves as a foundational framework. So we want to be balanced there. I do think it's important this is done at the national level. Right now, there are over 1,000 bills going through the state legislatures all across the U.S. So you can imagine that creates a patchwork of regulations which would really affect innovation, because for a small company, for a startup, how do you cope up with those varied regulations, and how do you compete with countries like China, which are moving fast in this technology? So I think we have to get the balance right. We have to make sure we are able to innovate, and I think it's better done at the national level.
Okay, so let's talk about energy production. That's a big part of this conversation. We can see where you're standing there. You have just announced there in Texas tens of billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure to keep AI running, but critics have worries about the impact on the environment. I want to read something from the United Nations Environment Program. They put it this way about these data centers running AI. They said they're large consumers of water, which is becoming more scarce in many places. They rely on critical minerals and rare elements, which are often mined unsustainably, and they use massive amounts of electricity, spurring the emission of planet-warming greenhouse gases. Now, I read just days ago about a Google project called Suncatcher would actually use satellites in orbit to create and harness some of this energy. I had to, frankly, Google it to see if it was a real story or whether I was being punked. Tell us about this technology.
Look, I mean, over time, at Google, we are always proud of taking moonshots. You mentioned Waymo earlier. You know, that's been over a decade in the making. We're working on quantum computing. In that spirit, one of our moonshots is to how do we one day have data centers in space so that we can better harness the energy from the sun? You know, that is 100 trillion times more energy than what we produce in all of Earth today. So we want to put these data centers in space, closer to the sun, and I think we are taking our first step in 27. We'll send tiny racks of machines and have them in satellites, test them out, and then start scaling from there. But there's no doubt to me that a decade or so away, we'll be viewing it as a more normal way to build data centers.
Well, and so much of this, as you say, normal, it's a normal way of life for a lot of young people to use AI, whether it's researching, studying, writing papers. But do you worry that it's kind of short-circuiting the independence of human thought, just kind of that intangible ingredient that comes from human exploration and ideas and thinking outside of the box? If people become so dependent on putting together a great query so they can find the answer they want, but not really being pushed to do any of their own introspection or thinking beyond normal parameters?
You know, if I were to, about 25 years ago, people were asking the same questions about Google search. That if kids could go to Google and just find the answer, would they be able to learn something? Would it affect how they think and learn? And the answer is no. These are tools which we can see already people adapting, using them. For example, in YouTube now, every creator has access to AI tools. So if you're a single mom, using your spare time and you have a cooking show on YouTube, with AI, you have the same tools which maybe only a movie studio could have had in your hands. So I think humans will use these tools to express themselves even more, and I would predict will unleash more creative potential than we've ever seen before. And I think on the consumption side, humans will also value those unique experiences with the human touch. And so I think as a society, we will adapt. And I expect our creative days are going to be even more richer in the future.
Well, when AI can come to my house and actually cook that dinner, I'll be in much better shape. I could use the help. Sundar Pichai, thank you very much for your time. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, Shannon. Real pleasure.